Well, good morning or good evening or good afternoon or wherever you're at. My name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Good deal. All right, fantastic. Well, Ollie, thanks for inviting me to come and be a part of this. And I know it's been going on for a while. I have such a crazy busy schedule, and Tuesdays are just jam packed. But I'm glad I was able to come and participate tonight. And there's a lot of amazing people that you've had come, and some of my favorite people in the world share on this platform and share in this group. So I'm privileged to be here. My sobriety date is April 7th, 1987. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. My home group is AA on the Rocks, strong three legacy group right here in the city of St. Louis. If you're ever in St. Louis, we meet on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. It's also a hybrid meeting, so we do have a Zoom, virtual presence in Alcoholics Anonymous as well. But if you're ever here, I would love to have you come to the group. And if we get a hold of you early enough, we'll put you to work. I can promise you we'll get some mileage out of you. We always try to squeeze everything we can out of our guests. It's just hospitality here in Big Mo. But it's a privilege to be here. I come from a great line of sponsorship, and Steve is my sponsor today. And we just came off our lineage of sponsorship, our first sponsorship weekend, and man, was that a lot of fun. And it was down in Alabama, and we just had a time of our life down there. So it's good to be back, and thank you, Steve, for introducing me. And again, my sponsor, most of my sobriety was a gentleman named Tom I from North Carolina. Some of you may have known Tom personally or heard some of his stuff or spoke with him or shared a podium with him. But by far one of my greatest heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a gentleman that helped me to become a 3 Legacy member by far, and just as a member, but also as a home group, et cetera. I could go on and on about that. But so I'm blessed to have good DNA, if you would, in me, and I'm forever grateful for that. I'm as involved in Alcoholics Anonymous today as I've ever been, and I love this stuff. I love Alcoholics Anonymous and everything it's did for me. And so this topic is one that's it's important, but it's also one that I would just love to talk about. And so we're going to dive into that. But before we really get into the subject of the mind and the inspirational part of the mind and all the transformation I think that has to happen to renew our minds, to restore our minds, to heal, and to trust our thinking again, and not be held hostage by it like most of us have been most of our life. There's a lot of work that has to be done and continue on and stay active in order to maintain that healing nature of the mind. But I just want to say that for the new person, if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, welcome. We are so excited you're here. I think it's on page 105 of Bill Sees It, where Bill Wilson says that our chief responsibility is to deliver an adequate demonstration of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that this meeting is that, and countless other representations on here around the country of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're here, you're new, I'm glad you're here. I hope tonight's an adequate demonstration for you. I can tell you that I was introduced to AA in 1979 in the Department of Corrections. And I would just come out of Boonville Correctional Center and was picked up on another charge, and they held me at a detention center. And in that detention center, a couple members brought AA in there. And I was far from conceding that I was powerless over alcohol, but it was definitely an adequate demonstration of AA. Part of my plea bargain when I bonded out was I could go back and do 2.5 more years, or I could, or an option was to go do 30 days in the treatment center. By this time, it's 1980. Now, I quit school when I was 13, but I had enough math in me to know that 30 days was a heck of a lot shorter than 2.5 years. So I took the plea bargain. I went to treatment for the first time in 1980, and again, given another adequate demonstration of Alcoholics Anonymous. It would be 1987 in a whole series of consequences and darkness. And I'm really not going to spend time on that tonight because I want to really get into the meat of the subject. But in 1987, incarcerated again in a cell by myself, quarantined, in a lot of trouble, felony DWIs, parole violation, on my way back to the penitentiary, in my underwear, in a very air-conditioned tank, very cold tank. I got down on my knees and I said the most honest prayer I've ever said in my life, I think. And it was simply a simple prayer. It was no more than God help me. But God answered that prayer. He's always answered the prayer. And from that moment till now, I've never found it necessary to pick up a drink. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. I just didn't come into Alcoholics Anonymous on fire. I was very much a skeptic, very much a doubter, very much a troubled human being. Had a disturbed mind for sure. Had a lot of trouble, a lot of consequences to face, and but through persistent 12-step work, from people that really poured out to me early in the treatment center and stayed with me as I came back to St. Louis because I went out of town to go to treatment. They stayed with me and they were persistent, and they finally encouraged me to go AA. I didn't go to AA right away. And what I've learned in my 36 plus years of sobriety and coming around is that there's three types of people that come to AA. There's those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those who don't know what's happening at all. And I've been all three of those cats. I had no idea what was going on when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I just sat and I watched. And that's how most of us come here. I mean, especially in confined spaces, we come with our arms crossed and we just watch. And why? We don't know that we do this, but we listen with our eyes and we think with our feelings. I'll say it again. We listen with our eyes and we think with our feelings. So we watch what's going on. And I think this is why Bill uses that language as being an example of an adequate demonstration of what's possible here. And I was fortunate enough to be around healthy people and healthy AA that gave me an adequate demonstration, that allowed me to have a visual to see, even though I had so many delusions of why it wasn't going to happen for me. And I'll talk about some of that in a minute. It was still enough of an example, enough of an inspiration that it pulled me to stay. I didn't get into the steps until about 3 years sober. I was on a step none for the first 3 years. If you were at the last international, the person who spoke on Friday night said, I was doing everything right in AA with 12 things. And that was definitely my story. There was no doubt about it. I resisted. And why? Well, ultimately, it's just because I didn't trust it. I just didn't trust the process would work for me. I had too much individualism, consumerism, materialism, secularism in my DNA, in my mind, talking about the mind, that you call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more spiritual if I had a few $100s in my pocket, and a better looking girl and a legal driver's license and not be on parole and a car that wasn't held together by bumper stickers. This is my mindset. This was my worldview at the time. So I resisted the spiritual mathematics here, the idea that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 and the impossible can become possible. And it gives us that equation on page 64 that when we put the spiritual ahead of the material, we straighten out. And that's really the challenge that we're with. But eventually I started this journey and it tasted so good that I never stopped from that day to now. And it totally transformed my life. And I don't have enough time to get into everything that's materialized in my life, but it's a lot. It's a lot of things. And I'll share some of those, but I really want to just get into our topic. And that topic is talking about the working part of the mind, this inspiration that starts to come to us, that we start to have confidence in this imposter narrative, if you would, that's held us hostage all our life, starts to have a new voice. And there starts to be two voices instead of just one dominant dark voice. There starts to be a voice of light, a voice of reason, a voice of sanity, a voice of sound decisions and choices and inspiration and motivation and encouragement. And it's that mind that we can rely on today. It's a mind that took a guy like me with a very broken past, with no education, not even a GED, allowed me I tried to do it incarcerated, couldn't do it, but allowed me in sobriety in my 30s to finally go back and get a GED, finally walk across the stage and get a bachelor's degree, and write my mom a note and send her a bumper sticker that said, "Hey, your kid made the honor roll." That was a big joke in our family. And eventually walked across the stage and got a master's degree in business and wrote a thesis on starting a business from scratch and selling it, and being able to do that not once, not twice, but right as I speak, right in my third moment with that. And eventually walk across the stage and get another master's degree. So the impossible has become possible for me. I became a dad, I became a husband, I became a grandfather. I became so many things here in the course of 36 plus years. And I owe every single bit of it. If you flip back the tag, it was made in Alcoholics Anonymous, no question about it. All of it materialized here. Everything I have in my life is, I can point right to you people and to our wonderful fellowship for that. But this topic of what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration now becomes the working part of the mind. And the mind, I believe, is very much part of the soul. And how I would define the soul, if you would, is made up of our mind, our will, and our emotions. And I think if we're honest about that how tainted, how corrupt, how broken, how damaged, how defective my mind was when I got here. but also my will. My will wasn't definitely in line with God's. It was broken in so many ways, and my emotions were all over the place. And so all this, we talk about emotional sobriety, spiritual maturity. I think they're pretty synonymous terms, but this process of evolving and purging, if you would, this purging of our will in line with God's will is going to be a lifelong process, and none of us are going to ever perfect that. But the mind is something that we spend a lot of time talking about, and sometimes I think we misquote it. Sometimes we make remarks, and I think we're talking about in our early days, like the minds of like a bad neighborhood, don't go in there alone. That all these negative connotations, if you would, about our mind. And in the beginning, they're definitely very broken. But as we stay sober, we start to heal from that. I mean, even in Bill's story, Bill makes the remarks that the mind and body, they're marvelous mechanisms, and they truly, truly are. And then, in the chapter, there is a solution. It tells us that the problem centers in our mind. And what is the problem? Well, the problem is I suffer from a lot of delusion about who I am, what alcoholism is, what God's all about. And that's really what I'm going to unpack tonight is how I wrestle with things, the subject of a higher power, the subject of a lower power, the subject of religion, my doubts, my atheism, my agnosticism, my questions about God, my questions about spirituality, and on and on and on. I had to wrestle, and I say wrestle, I mean in the present tense. It's not a past tense thing. It's definitely a present tense. And I still wrestle with so many things today in my life. But it's so far removed from where I was to where I am today. And the beautiful part is that I know God's not going to leave me here. He didn't leave me there, and he's definitely not going to leave me here. And it's only going to grow. And it's a test that there's, our function now is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And I know that's true. And I can have hope in that. And I'm going to continue to progress and get better and be more connected at a deeper level than I already am. And that's, to me, that's not just good news, friends. That's the best news ever. And we're given that in Alcoholics Anonymous. But we're talking about this idea of God, this higher power. And there's a great quote from a theologian who was an atheist for a long time. And I love this quote. I think it's 100% right on. It's from a theologian named A.W. Tozer. And this is what it says, and I quote, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. For we tend, by a secret law of the soul, to move towards our image of God," end quote. So this purging process, this moving towards this idea, this concept, this design for living, good orderly direction, however you want to frame it, whatever language works for you or how you visualize or understand this process. But it's that understanding will determine, one, I think, my motivation for moving that direction and how I pursue it one day at a time there forward. And so that's changed drastically so many times, and it's a work in progress, and it still is today. But I know that I had to overcome a lot of things to get there, a lot of things, and it is really based in delusion. And delusion, I would frame them into 6 delusions. And the first delusion is the one that corrupts our mind. It's this, I would call it the delusion of inequality. It's delusion that I'm not enough. Just the way I am is not enough. And so the temptation, the driving force of my life is either to do all these things to get you to see who I am, or the extreme opposite of that is to get you to look at who I'm not. Just full of self-pity, self-loathing, and self-destruction. And it's just never enough. I'm never enough. And almost every story you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous starts with this delusion. I'm like a square peg trying to fit in a round hole. I felt like everybody else had the answers to the test but me. And we hear it articulated and shared in so many ways. But this delusion, what you thought of me paralyzed me. I could have never told you that in the early days of my life, but when I'm looking back in inventory and just our exchanges and conversation, it dominated my life. And guess what? It still can. It still very much can if my dependence is on you instead of God. And so that delusion, overcoming that delusion and knowing that that's why the drink was so magic. Because the magic, because this delusion created all this terror, this boredom, this worry, this negativity, this dysfunction, this noise, this pounding, if you will, going on, and just never stop. And then finally, we get that drink into us, and It's a spiritual experience. It's an apocalyptic moment. It just means that something's been unveiled that we've never experienced before in our life. And that's why we love King Alcohol. It's why I love King Alcohol. It would just totally transform my life. And so that transformation led me down the road to, destructive drinking. And it pretty much happened right out the gate. And there was a lot of consequences. And I'm not going to get into all those, but the delusion number two, if I was to number them, delusion number two is that, and it kills most of alcoholics, is that I'm not alcoholic. That delusion that I'm not what all the evidence says I am kills most of us, unfortunately. It's just a heartbreaking story, but it's the truth. We toss the word denial around a lot in AA, but it's only mentioned twice in the big book, once in the spiritual appendix and once in Bill's story, and both times talking about denying a power greater than ourselves. The way our book really describes alcoholism is way past denial. Sure, there's an element of denial in every human experience. I mean, I know it's over there, I'm just not going to look at it. I'm going to suppress it. But the delusion means it's staring me right in my eyes and I can't see it for what it is. And it's very destructive. And as our book would say on page 30, that most of us were unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics, and most of us will pursue this to the gates of insanity or death. And this illusion being very synonymous in language and our literature, this illusion that we're like other people, man, it has to be smashed. And thank God for me, it got smashed. And I was able to finally come in and concede that. I was finally able to concede to my innermost self that I was powerless. But it brought me right up against the next delusion, which is very much triggered to this mind thing we're talking about. And then as I could sit at the table to tell you my name's Harold, I am an alcoholic, but it's not my fault. It's called victimization, if you had to give a big fancy scientific name for it. And the problem with that mindset, that I'm a victim, that I'm here because of you, is that I can literally drink myself to death and it's not my fault. I can blow my veins out, I can blow my lungs out, I can blow my nostrils out, man, I can blow my brains out. And it's not my fault. I can sit in a 9x7 or 10x6 jail cell for the rest of my life and it's not my fault. It's such a powerful delusion, and it had me by the throat. And thank God for our steps, because it helped me finally toss that victim card. But it wasn't an overnight process to get to it. But then it brings you right up against this next delusion where you can say, my name is Harold. I am an alcoholic. I take full responsibility for my life. But let's just be real with each other. I broke too many hearts. I burnt too many bridges. There's little hope that my life's ever going to be any better than what I really am. So why even try? It creates this element of discouragement. And once discouragement gets into our soul, our will, our mind, our emotions, we quit. And it's why we have a recidivism rate of 60-70% in the United States and abroad, because people have given up. That's why we have people that have been in treatment centers decades, time after time, repetitively, over and over again. They're already given up before they ever get started. And this delusion, I can't be anything other than what I am, this mindset, this imposter narrative, this false identity, has to be smashed. And it took a while. It took the steps, and it took a long time for that to happen for me. But then what comes into mind tonight is this delusion of this next delusion number 4, what I would call the delusion of spiritual disqualification. That because of who I am and the things I've done and my twisted perceptions of God, I'm just disqualified for this thing. I mean, there's just no way I'm going to have the experience you're having. There's just no way I'm going to have a connection. I'm going to really experience the grace of God. I'm really going to experience forgiveness at real levels, at transforming levels of freedom, where I can finally take the shackles off and finally walk about a free person. That seemed very impossible because I hadn't made the amends. I hadn't fully told my entire life story. I was holding on to some of the darker and uglier and nastier things in stock. All those things that liberate us, that free us, I was still hanging on to those things. And then ultimately, the last delusion I would speak of is this delusion that we do all this stuff, and for what? For what purpose? Just to barely get by, take public transportation for the rest of my life, make, dead end wages, just exist, survive, and it's all delusion, but it's enough to keep me in prison for the rest of my life. And the working part of that is this mind. And there's not a lot of inspiration in the mind when you're caught in that cycle, that vicious cycle. And there's people I know listening right now or listening on after the fact that are stuck in one of those cycles, or a multitude of them. And the good news is, and again, it's not just good news, it's the best news ever, is that you can be liberated from that. But it's going to take a lot of people. I mean, we come here and it's like this, like just imagine a Ziploc bag with 1,000-piece puzzle in it and with several pieces missing. That's how we show up here. This is our life. We walk into the room, so this is my life. It's a freaking mess. And pieces are missing. And it's never going to be it. I've been carrying this bag my entire life. And if we're humble enough, if we're teachable enough, if we're surrendered enough, a sponsor or a group of people is going to say, hey, just come over and sit down and dump that puzzle out right here on the table. And if we can get to that point, if we can trust enough to do that and just shake that bag out and let all those pieces fall onto the table. And the next thing you know, there's chairs moving around the table and there's all kinds of hands, there's all kinds of activity. And little by little, my life starts to come back together. This puzzle, this impossible puzzle starts to take shape. And even those pieces that are missing, somehow this magic, this sovereign hand of God does the impossible. And the impossible becomes possible. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 in the spiritual mathematics of this thing. And it's an amazing ride. And it's easy to miss all that. But if we can do that, if we can stay long enough for that to happen, then we start to see, it starts to come together. We start to get past this delusion that there's no real value for my life, that I do have value, that I do have purpose, and that God can use it. And he even tells it on page 124 that clinging to the thought that your dark past is truly the greatest asset you have. Well, there's a whole lot of healing that's got to go on before you get to that space. But once you do, then it kind of just helps you understand, I think, that the first 11 steps are really setting us up to really carry out step 12 for the rest of our life. And it's a lifelong practice. And it's a double-edged sword. It's a bittersweet remedy. Because if we do it, if we come all in and we set all the way down and we stay with it, well, it leads to a storybook life. It leads to the most incredible life beyond your wildest dreams. And we hear them all the time on these platforms. If you don't do it, well, you're a dead man walking. You're a dead person walking. And it could be a very slow and painful and malicious death if you've ever watched somebody perish from alcoholism. But the good news is we don't have to do that. But we have to overcome a lot of these delusions, I think, to have this renewing of the mind, this generation of the mind. And so that's really what I want to spend the bulk of my time is talking about that. And so we think about the idea of a higher power. And what I would say, there's a story about a little girl. She's in class one day, and it's a young people's class, and they're art, and they're all drawing pictures, and she's drawing away with her crayons. And this teacher walks up and looks at what she's doing, and he asks her the question, what are you drawing? And she goes, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher kind of smirks and says, well, nobody knows what God looks like. And she said, they will when I'm done. And I never forget that story because that's really what it looks like here. On page 29 of our big book, it tells us that it's referring, and I'm paraphrasing, but in the back of the book, it's referring to our stories, this narrative theology, this narrative spirituality. Because that's what AA is. It's storytelling. We're just sharing stories. Our experience, our strength and hope is all stories, things that have happened to us, our practical experience at life on life's terms. But it says that in each of these stories, each person's going to tell how they developed a relationship with God. And our hope is that you don't find any things in bad taste. Our hope is that you hear these stories. You let down your arms, you quit listening with your eyes and thinking with your feelings, and you finally say, yes, I'm one of these people, and I must have this thing. And you come all the way in, and you sit all the way down, and most importantly, you stay. And that's the truth. And so I do have a vision of what God looks like today, and I'll talk about that, what that looks like. I can just tell you that it's all light, it's all good, and it's all love. That's the easiest way to say it. That's what God looks like to me. That's what my higher power, if I had to define it in very simplistic terms, all light, all good, all love. But that was far from what it was like when I got here. I had a religious upbringing. I was raised by a single mom who was very broken herself and who made a commitment when I was new in life to she ran my alcoholic dad off, and she made a commitment to follow her Catholic roots, and she never wavered on that until she died. And she matured and blossomed, became one of the most incredible women on the planet. She passed away, unfortunately, in 2015. And being a mama's boy and being biased, I would say that, there's nothing more beautiful than a woman who's walked with God for a long time. And my mother was one of those people. And she wanted me to have this relationship. So as a little boy, from kindergarten to the 4th grade, I was in a parochial school, a little bitty rural town in Missouri, right on the Kansas-Oklahoma border, maybe 100 people in my class, maybe. And so I very isolated, very shut off from the real world and what was going on around the world. And and so I have to go to mass every day. I love going to mass. I love church. I loved it enough. I'd even come home and play church. I'd get out the TV trays and throw a cool blanket or an Afghan over and make it look good. I dump the fruit out of the fruit bowl, fill it full of potato chips for the Eucharist, get some great Kool-Aid for a wine, get out a cheap towel for a stole, bring a few people over, save a few souls at the Longhouse. It was a great day. I played church several times as a youngster. And at that time, it's the 60s and going into the 70s, and the rock operas are out, Godspell, Tommy, Hair, Jesus Christ Superstar, all these with spiritual overtones, the peace, love movements going on, the Jesus revolutions going on, the spiritual awakenings going on in America on a lot of fronts. The illegal smile and Jesus everywhere. And so I'm being brought up in this. And so it does formulate, it does give me a foundation for faith, but with a lot of twisted things. But it didn't take long. I had all these religious ideas about God until I walked into my first evolution class. When I walked into my first evolution class, the professor basically blew my faith up about 2 seconds. I just wadded my faith up right there and tossed it in the trash. And next came the drugs and the booze and the smoke and the alcohol. And I just spent the decades burning my life into the ground from that point forward till I came to you people. So my idea of God was twisted at best when I got here. I had a lot of misconceptions, but because of the hearts I broke, because of the bridges I burned, there was just no way that I was going to be able to overcome that. And that's a really important insight. So this shift had to change. And because of the steps, it didn't mean that you can just visualize the channel. It's a bridge between you and God, or me and God. And if there's anything blocking the bridge, nothing's getting across. Not yesterday, not today, not tomorrow. If I allow anything to get block me off, nothing's getting across. The communication line is blocked. And so my channel, if this was a channel when I got here, this channel was completely solid. It looked more like this when I got here. It was completely shut. And it had been long before I ever picked up a drink. And there was a lot of stuff that shaped what was in there, the context, the upbringing, no dad in my life, my mom never around, growing up on the streets, having sexual experiences before I was even a teenager with men and women, being sexually abused, suffering physical abuse, physical abuse. All this stuff is in my tank, going to boys' homes, going to juvenile penitentiary, going to jail, just living on the streets, just name it. All those crazy, dark experiences clogged this channel up long before I got to you people. So when I sat in these rooms, God sounded like this. My mind was a disaster. It was like on full blast with the equalizer kicked on. Just wow, wow, wow. God sounded like this sitting in the meetings. And so when people say they're connected to God, they're hearing God's voice, they feel God's spirit, they pray, they meditate, they reflect, they get divine inspiration, they get direction from them, they feel good about that. It takes away care, boredom, and worry. They rest easier, and that's quick to anger, make foolish decisions, all those things the book tells us. It really wasn't my experience. But why? Because my channel was completely clogged. There was no sunlight of the spirit getting into my soul, and we suffer from a soul sickness. The soul, again, being my mind, my will, and my emotion, it was contaminated. Been contaminated my whole life, long before I drowned it in alcohol. And that's what's got to heal. That's the root of the problem. That's what's got to change. And if we can get that away, the steps give us that opportunity. The steps 4 through 9, especially, allow the work to happen to remove what's blocking us off. And through that blockage, so it's as a lot of our heroes would say, it's about subtraction rather than addition. It's about removing things so that the sunlight of the spirit has a chance to shine through on our life. But when it does, when it starts to happen, I think like page 75 of our big book really talks about it when it says that, and I'm paraphrasing for the sake of time, but it's at this stage after we've told somebody our entire life story. It's at this stage of our story that most of us claim to have had our first real spiritual experience. It's because the blockage, we finally got flow. We finally experienced the grace of God at a really meaningful way, with transforming level. And it's powerful. And if that hasn't happened to you yet, it will if you come all the way in, sit all the way down and stay. In dealing with the darkness, in wrestling with this idea of God, a lower power. Am I responsible for everything that goes on in my life? Is there really a devil? Is there Satan? Is there all these other forces at work in the world? These are all things I had to wrestle with and still wrestle with. But I watched a movie the other night. The name of the movie was called Above Suspicion. Some of you might have saw it. The character's name was Susan Smith, and it was played by a lady named Emilia Clarke, who played the Mother of Dragons on Game of Thrones, if you know that person. And this is a quote from that movie. And when it happened, I had to hit pause and go back and listen to it again and write it down. I want to share it with you. And this is the quote. It says, "That's the way the devil comes. He don't come to you as evil. He don't come to you on fire. He comes as everything you ever wanted. He comes as you." And man, that smacked me right upside the head. I'm like, wow, that really is how darkness has come. I mean, it just, you got the light, you got the dark, you got the flesh, you got the spirit. And no matter how long I've been sober, if I test the flesh, I lose every single time. It's just it's an automatic. And yet I'm still tempted. Yet the desires come to me, and sometimes I say yes to things I know that aren't in my best interest still today. And why do we do it? And for the longest time, I would try to claim to be atheist or agnostic in my thinking or my theology or my worldview, but it wasn't that, because I truly believe, and Bill tells us that this idea of a power greater than ourselves, we've had it our entire lives. We can't hang our hat on that. He tells us that, and tells us it, and we agnostic in two places. One of them, he actually says, is actually we are fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, the channel may be blocked by pomp or by worship or other things, but in some form or another, it's there. For faith and a power greater than ourselves, and this miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as human beings themselves. I mean, that's right to the point. And then he also makes this comment that we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as feeling we have had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search spiritually, but it was there. Well, I couldn't see it until this got unclogged. He was much as fact as we were. We found that great reality deep down inside us. And so that's, so Bill blows that apart. Our literature blows that apart. This idea that we don't know about God. So if I know about God, then what am I doing? And ultimately, I'm suppressing the truth about God. And see, I think that's the spiritual battle still today. When I act a fool, when I'm out of my mind, when I'm angry, or I'm distant, or I'm deflated, or whatever at an extreme level, at that moment, there's just one or two things that are going on. I mean, really, when I'm vindictive, fearful, resentful, egocentric to the extreme, it's one or two things that's going on. It's either I chose to suppress the truth about God, this design for living, spiritual principles as I understand them, or I truly don't know God at all. And for me, that was the process, because I had a lot of twisted perceptions about this higher power. I might give lip service that God is all light, all good, and all love, but I really didn't believe that in my heart of hearts, and my behavior showed that. So it was just a process, of staying here long enough for that to work itself out. And it's still very much a work in progress. The great prophet Ted Lasso, for those who watch Ted Lasso, he has a quote. He says, "Find out before you flip out." Well, I just encourage you, before you flip out, to spend some time with the sponsor and the steps, and see what happens with your life. See how unclogged you get. Feel the rush of the sunlight of the spirit into your soul, and see how much that changes. But we have to do a lot of things. And one is we have to come to the end of ourselves. I mean, it ultimately has to happen. For some people, it happens when they get here. They put down the booze and they are done with everything. You're just done. I'll do it somebody else's way. I come all the way in, I'll sit all the way down, I'll stay. And they're selling this meeting tonight. That's their story. But it's not mine. I came and I finally put down the alcohol, but I definitely didn't get rid of that right to myself. A right that I claim, I think, since I was born. And if you don't think that's true, put 2 3-year-olds in the same room and give them one toy. You find out just how this selfishness has always been with us. And so from the get-go, I've had this problem with self, and we have to come to the end of that. And that's how it works, tells us in chapter 5. we have to be convinced that into life our own self can hardly be a success, and we have to come to that. And it carries on over into step 3. And we had to have a new employer, a new director in our lives. We had to have a new platform. We had to have a new design for living, other than our own. And that coming to the end of ourselves has to happen for all of us. And it's a daily dying to ourselves. Because some days I wake up, that radio station's always on WIIFM. What's in it for me? It's almost by default there every single day in my life. And I have a choice, either crank it up and really get in what's in it for me, or to surrender through a process of prayer and meditation and conversation if necessary, writing, inventory, whatever, to fully surrender and come all in today, to turn my will and life over to the care of God, and even give a moment actually, and try to live along a different path. And that is the process. And so it helps us make this shift. It helps us to renew the mind. There's a great scripture in Bible, Romans 12:2. It says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And you will be able to test and approve of God's will, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. I mean, this restoration of the mind. And we can have it. And it's happened. And my self-confidence went up, my self-worth went up. But more importantly, as I healed my heart, this soul, this will, my emotions, my worldview, what I live for, what I get up for, what I have energy for, starts to shift less and less about my deal and more about what I can contribute to life, as our third set prayer promises would offer us. And so, my mind's not perfect, and it's twisted and it's broken, and it'll have dark thoughts and very self-centered thoughts. And today I had to go do some, follow-up medical procedures. And yes, my mind's trying to work me over with some of that stuff. But I just trust God. I share it with my sponsor, and I get back on the path, and I just keep going and persevere. It's like I told my buddy Peter today. I called, who lost his dad. I called Peter, and we were sharing back and forth. And I said, well, you know what? Alcoholics are like tea bags. We don't know what we're made of until we put us in hot water, right? When you get in hot water, you start finding out what you're really about, what your substance is about. And so, we had to have this chance. So in these last couple of minutes, as I close out, I'll just say that this shift had to happen. And it happened. And this shift, if you would, is from moving from a taker to a giver. It's like this third step prayer promises, that we think less and less about ourselves and more about what we can contribute to life. And life will take on new meaning, all those promises, but so much of it centers in our mind. We just see life differently. It's Chuck C, a new pair of glasses, it's spiritual transformation. It's whatever you want to call it. But more importantly, what I believe more than anything today is that so much intellectual exercise that I tried to put into getting to know God would send me down in spirals and set me chasing my tail. What I've learned more than anything is that my spiritual growth and awakening, if you would, has happened experientially. It's experience of sitting with the steps with myself, with my sponsor, with other people I sponsor, and things like this. And it's just the experience actually doing this stuff that's woke me up, that's transformed my life. And you taught me how to love. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. As our book says, that you're going to have the privilege to walk shoulder to shoulder with other people and help them rediscover life. And if you do that long enough, you're going to finally know what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. There's this shift of being able to love, not just myself, but you. And it's that shift. And so my DNA, my model, my design for living today is to walk humbly, to live self-sacrificially, to live other-centered, and to love everybody, including my enemies. And that's not easy to do, friends. But that's the calling of my life. I mean, if I just had one pure marching job when I get up in the morning, it's just, here, I'll go out and love everybody. And you taught me how to do that. Alcoholics Anonymous continues to teach me how to do that. And it gives me a platform and a society, a fellowship that exists nowhere on the planet. I'm in a lot of theological circles and places like that all the time. But I can promise you, it's the most kingdom of God thing I've ever experienced in my life is right here, right now, where we're in. Because we truly don't care who you are, what you did, what you're going to do tomorrow, what your gender, what your sexuality, what your politics. We don't care. We're just literally glad that you're here. And to be able to sit with that day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, it will change your soul. It will heal your soul, and you'll learn to love again, maybe for the first time ever. And I can promise you, That's the only thing our illness has no defense against, is that love that we experience here in the fellowship of the Spirit. So wherever you're at on your spiritual journey, I truly hope you come all the way in, so all the way down, because it's what's changed my life. You give me, and I think that's the greatest way I can honor God, is by loving you. And that's what I try to do each and every day. So thank you, Ollie, for the opportunity to come and share tonight. And most importantly, Alcoholics Anonymous, thank you for my life. And that's all I got. Peace out.
Just, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, my name's Charles, I'm an alcoholic. Harold, I just want to call, to dial in and say thank you for sharing. But I'm here babysitting my son's dogs, and I was supposed to take them out at 5 o'clock. So I'm running late, but I had to come in and say thank you for the share. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Next up, Alice, would you like to come on up?
Hi, family. My name is Alice. I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Harold, I just love you. I often tell people, I'm like, Harold, the guy that says, my job is to love my wife in a way she knows God is real. Like, what a profound statement of love. And I love so much of what you said tonight. And so I do have a question, right? You talked about this narrative of theology and the way that Alcoholics Anonymous is this profound spiritual path, and that we learn to love, right? And we learn to see the delusions that are blocking us from that. And so specifically about the delusions, right? When you're working with people and they're in one of those delusions, right? I'm not a real alcoholic, or, it's not my fault, or, I've done something so bad, I'm never going to be saved, or, there's no value in me, right? Like these are profoundly deep beliefs that people come to us with. What have you found is most helpful in moving people from that kind of internalized, the devil comes as me, into the light? And I know that's a hard question, but any strategies that you can share with people to help sponsees move?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a deep question, but I think that the simple answer to it is that our job, I believe, as three legacy members, is no matter where we're at, is to create an environment, a spiritual environment where people have a chance, whether it's sitting at our coffee table, our kitchen table one-on-one, or we're sitting in our home group. But the quicker I can move that person from a taker to a giver, the quicker the Spirit's going to get a hold of them and change their life. And yes, it's as simple as putting chairs or making coffee, but the minute, I go places every week. I don't want to end up have my whole sobriety. And so I'm in a treatment center, penitentiary every week. But the treatment center, especially, they make us wait 90 days before we can bring people back. But we're immediately bringing people back because it's in that transaction. Even sitting there, Bill has got a term for it. It's on page 109 of 12. He calls it the magnificent reality of Alcoholics Anonymous. That the newest newcomer, as blind as he is, can help his sibling alcoholic still see and give them hope. And it's that exchange that I think I was with Tom one day. I'll never forget this. I was with Tom. We're riding around, and if you ever rode with Tom, he was kind of a NASCAR driver. You had to really hang on to everything you had when you're riding with Tom. But he had the speaker on, and this guy calls. He puts him on speaker, and he's talking. He's like an auctioneer. He's just vomiting his problems. Blah, 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 blah. And we couldn't even get it worded edgewise. And Tom's looking at me grinning. And finally, he stops long enough to breathe. And Tom says this statement. I'll never forget it. Tom said, "You're working on the wrong patient." That's what he told me. You're working on the wrong patient. I went, bang, and that hit me so hard. But that exchange happens, I think, immediately. And the quicker we can move somebody into that, despite how far they are along in the steps, it's that spirit that helps them see themselves for what they really are. And that, even as broken as they are, that God can use them in moving in powerful ways. And I believe that's the quickest way. That's how I would answer that question. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Harold. Dave B., come on up.
There you go. Thank you. I don't know. I made this phone different Zoom thing and anyways, I'm on a phone. But thank you. Thanks, Harold. Good to see you. You always share and you share good stuff. And I can see you follow directions more than I've have. And but I think the what I really wanted to say is, because I always heard, a long time ago, yeah, alcoholics are takers rather than givers, and then that what you said there about contributing, and I'm there. That struck me again. I always see that. What can I contribute to life? But think in both them ways, would be a lot more uh, beneficial for me. A little bit understanding these guidance principles, and following these directions. So, you always give me some insights to that. So good to, I don't really have a question or anything. I just like that analogy of that taker, that be a giver, and the word in Alcoholics Anonymous to contribute. So you always contribute. I see that. And that's a pretty amazing what people do when they contribute to Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Brent H, would you like to come up?
Hey, my name's Brent. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Brent.
Hey, Harold. I've heard you tell me this for years and years and years about come on in and sit down. And I know there was times in my sobriety that I have like come in and I kind of get back out on the edge and then the boat kind of starts rocking. Or like I like to use the analogy, I get in the passenger seat of the car and I reach over and try to grab that steering wheel instead of letting God drive, and I get there where I'm supposed to. And you've always reminded me I need to stay in the middle. And when I stay in the middle, I have a peace and that spirituality within inside me. And when I start thinking that it's time for me to run my life or that I can take care of things better, then that's when life starts getting really crazy, stupid, and I kind of run it off in the ditch. But you have told me that for years and years and years to come on in and sit down. And, I'm the good alcoholic who's stubborn and still think sometimes I can make all the right decisions. But as long as I come in and do what you tell me, life's pretty damn good. I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, I can relate to grabbing the steering wheel. Oh, that's a good analogy. I like that. Anybody else looking for some hands, questions, comments? Ali, go ahead.
Thanks, Nathan. Harold, thank you again, brother. It's just a wonderful, honest, authentic message. I appreciate it. My my morning devotion has become such an important, integral part of my life in cultivating a relationship with God. And I'm just always curious with people with longer term sobriety that have really been doing this for a while, what your current morning devotion looks like. Thank you very much.
Well, that's a great question, Ali. I appreciate it. I mean, I get that question a lot. It's a lot of times you get this question is, I really struggle with prayer and meditation. What are you doing? What are you reading? How are you doing it? What's going on? How do you feed your soul, if you would? And most of my own personal unpacking with myself and sponsees and others is when we struggle with prayer and meditation, it's not so much our technique or our approach to prayer and meditation, it's our idea of who God is. It ultimately. So as I've grown here, if God is still an authority figure, then prayer and meditation become a duty and a drudgery, and it's not something I really look forward to. It's easy to skip. It's easy to suppress it and not do it. But when that shift happens in our mind, talking about our subject tonight, and I start to believe that by grace I can walk with God, I can experience God, I can sit with God, and it's an easy statement to say, but it's a harder statement to do. And so I do all kinds of things. I listen, I read, I listen to podcasts. There's just so much that I do in the mornings, and because of my schedule, I have time. I mean, I read the Grapevine quote of the day. I read our daily reflections every day, but I have other spiritual literature that I read. I have other podcasts. I have other thinkers. I like to read all kinds of stuff. I listen to atheist podcasts. I listen to a lot of theologians. I study theologians. I study people. I read different things. And out of all those things, it's just meditation is a place to just sit with that, whatever it is you sat with and read. I listen to a podcast called 7 Good Minutes. Probably one of the best 7 minutes in a day, every single day. It's not spiritual necessarily. It is, but it's not packaged that way. It's more personal growth and development. So I listen to a lot of voices, a lot of things to spend time with, but just sitting quiet with that in that noise. I listen to a podcast called First 15, which is a guided meditation. I really love that. I got turned on that about a year ago. But I read the old devotion that Bill and Bob and Annie and Lois read all the time. The Upper Room. I spend time in that. So there's so many things. I got a whole book of different things, and I'm always open to more. And so I try to stay very teachable and very open to all kinds of literature, inside, outside of rooms, like our book says. Make use of what they offer. Be quick to see where they're right, and all that stuff. But I'm at a place today where I can sit with that kind of stuff and be challenged by it and moved by it. So that's it. And again, I think prayer and meditation is something that we do throughout the day. It's not just a 15 or 30-minute event in the morning, but it's just throughout the day. I mean, if you just like the daily reflections and just reread it at noon, at 3 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 9, just that simple reading and resonate on it, reflect on it. Because if you take the old Western definition of meditation, it means to ruminate. It means it's like a cud. It's like it's like a cow chewing a cud. You absorb all the nutrients out of it. So if you stay with it, as Psalm 1 would say, we meditate on the law day and night, that we stay with it throughout the day. It's not just a brief moment in time, but it's something we live with throughout the day. And if we do that, I think it goes a long way for us. So I'm a big reader. I read a lot, and all that stuff causes me to reflect and meditate all the time. So it's a fair question, but it's just changed so much over the years, Holly. But I appreciate you asking.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Holly. Joel, would you like to come up? There you go.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, Joel Terry, alcoholic. Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Harold. That was the perfect message for me tonight. I too, have a lot of the history in a lot of the areas, and I suffer from a lot of the delusions. And I think you really spoke really beautifully to I've got about 18 months in, and for me, I dove into service right away, and I found that to be the way forward in conjunction with the steps, that it keeps me moving forward and keeps me moving forward into God and out of self-will. And I have a lot of struggles when I go back into self-will. I know that I quickly descend back into a hellish place, but as long as I can get out of self and keep working with others and keep performing this service, that I find God, and I find that those puzzle pieces are starting to come back together. And I really wanted to thank you as well for speaking to the fact that there's light and dark. I've been hearing that a lot recently, and that really resonates with my soul as well, that there's a darkness that's trying to pull me back down. And just to add to my gratitude list that I'm rhyming off here today, I just wanted to say thanks to Ali and the Fellowship of the Spirit team as well, because you guys are part of my daily meditation, and you keep me on track and keep me moving forward into God with the materials that you release. And so, yeah, I'm just sitting here tonight. I know last week I was here, I was in a dark place, mentally, physically, spiritually, and today to sit here and listen to this message, it's a whole different set of glasses for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Becca, would you like to come up?
Hi, family. Beck, alcoholic. Harold, thank you so much for sharing. I got a lot out of that. You talked about a gentleman who wrote a book that talked about what comes into our minds when we think about God. Can you say his name again, please?
A.W., like A&W root beer, A.W. Tozer, Tozer.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's all I had.
Yeah.
Bobette, would you like to come up?
Hi, thank you. Hi, Babette, alcoholic. Another great meeting. Harold, thank you. I was listening to you within the framework of I work with a lot of the gals down the street here at the local treatment center. I'm right outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and we take a meeting, and I was listening to a lot of the things that you said apply would help me really bring the AA message. And I loved. So I'm leading up to a question, okay? But I just want to tell you the things that really resonated. You really hit me hard. Very, very illuminating. But what 29 on page 29, and when you said each individual in the personal story, so you're bringing this book alive. We each one of these gals, when they come into the treatment center, they get the big book and they put it in their suitcase, and they come into the AA meeting. And I have a couple speakers there, and we try to excite them into and bring the recovery into the room, because we try to just reach out and grab them, and we have a heck of a time. We have a heck of a time of having them come in. Their arms are crossed, they're leaning, feet up in the chair, to come all the way in and sit all the way down. And I'm gonna keep on keeping on, because I know we'll reach someone. My sponsees all help me. We all go in once a week, and how do you do it? How do you bring this alive? It took me several years to get 24 hours together, and I didn't scare. I had 2 cardiac arrests before I got 24 hours together. So I was very heavy into self-will. So I understand that. But what I don't understand is, what am I missing here? Thanks.
Well, thanks, Bobette. I think it's a fair question. I mean, if you're out in confined spaces, if you're going places you don't want to end up, county jails, penitentiaries, halfway houses, treatment centers, you can feel you can get very lonely very fast. But that's where we're called to go. We're called to carry a bright light into a dark space. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But when you're really entrenched in that, it can be a lonely space sometimes. And you can say, well, what's the point? Percentage wise, the statistics aren't very good. The treatment center I go into, I'm in there twice a week. I do a group on Wednesdays, which is just a conversation. And then we do our home group sponsors a meeting on Sunday nights. And the context of that particular space is that, let's just call it on average 50 people a month. So I've been going there for a solid 3 years during COVID. That's 600 people a year. That's 1,800 people. How many of those people do you think really make it? I mean, really come all the way and sit all the way down and stay. I mean, until they get past the delusion that they're not what all the evidence says they're not going to get here. And most of us go to the bitter end. And that's the hard part. But I think, when we talk about it in step 10, and Tom would say this a lot, that it's about effectiveness. And so no matter what I'm doing, even this particular meeting we're on right this second, the inventory is how effective it is. When I'm going into a space, a confined space, the question is how effective it is. I can share a Brent story because Brent's on here. And you just heard from Brent. I met Brent in 1996 at a maximum security penitentiary with 2 life sentences and no out day, not even knowing if he'd ever go home. But yet he was willing to come in and sign up for a 12-step workshop along with a lot of other offenders and come all the way in and sit down. And I watched the transformation happen for him. You know, we created an environment where he had a chance to recover. He got to the steps, and the same steps that transformed my life transformed his life. And little by little, people started to come back into his life, even with 2 life sentences and behind a razor wire. But little by little, his life and hope started to come. And he was the best, and along with countless other guys, were the best beacons of life to take into any meeting because they were on fire. So it's kind of back what I share with Olis. The quicker you can bring some of these women back, the ones that do come, are going to be your biggest resource in those places. And it's that narrative theology, but it's real. When I go into a facility and I'm sitting there with almost 36 plus years of sobriety, some of the people go, "Man, you're older than I am alive." You know, that's the kind of stuff that they'll say, you know, and it's humorous, but there's a message there. But when I bring in somebody who's got 90 days or just celebrated a year, we just brought in a couple of weeks ago, we had a panel of 3 guys that just came out of that treatment center and they all just celebrated a year. That was our panel for the night. And they blew the roof off the place and people swarmed them. And so that narrative, but the narrative can seem so impossible if you're brand new, listen to somebody with a long history. But somebody who's brand new says, you know, I just got 90 days. I just picked up that 6 months. I mean, that magic. And so we get them involved as quick as possible. So my encouragement is trying to bring some of those people back with you. Don't be the lone voice, but just be the facilitator, just creating a space where things can happen. And know that we're not about results. You know, Brent got an out date in 2006. We never thought it would happen. In 2008, he went home. He's been home since 2008. His life's totally transformed. We just kicked him out of Missouri. Now he lives in California. Just get out of here. Enough of you. So he just moved to California. But I'm just saying he's here right now. That's a prime example. There's a guy that came into the meeting along with everybody else with his hands crossed because he listens with his eyes and he thinks with his feelings. And it took him at least 6 months to bring his arms down. And once he did, and he said, "Come all the way in," he pulled a chair up and he made a commitment to stay. His life's never been better. So that's what I would encourage you to do. There's no, number one, we're not about results, but we do got to ask ourselves how effective we are. And whether it's county jail, treatment center, or maximum security penitentiary, or the Fellowship of the Spirit on Zoom on Tuesday night. How effective are we at what we're doing? But if lives are getting transformed, people are getting this thing, boom, that's the deal. Give God the glory and keep on keeping on. So great question. Thanks, Bobette.
Thank you, Bobette. And so we got one more question and then I'm going to hand it back to Ollie. Kim B, would you like to come on up? You turn your camera on if you can.
Sure. Can you see me? Okay.
Yep.
I'm Kim and I am an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here. I wanted to also thank you, Olis, because Olis is the one who sent me this flyer and I'm so grateful that I was able to hear you, Harold. You shared so much, so many things. And one thing, the first thing that I did catch that I was able to remember is that you shared that, you know, through your growth in Alcoholics Anonymous, you've, for yourself, or you have learned that the soul is the mind, the will, and the emotions all together, you know. And so I thought that was a great perception, a great terminology that I wrote down. And I really liked how you shared about like the devil, and then the darkness, the light, the devil, God, the negative, the positive, how you were talking about those types of things, how you grew with your learning and with your individuality, with your spiritual growth. I just really liked so much that you shared, and I was not in a position to write anything down, so I'm sharing from the top of my head. But lastly, Mr. Harold, I would like to ask you, please, you have I can see part of your number, but I can't see all of it. Can I please have your whole number in chat so that anybody who would like can please get in touch with you if you may.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, so we're at the end of our question and answer. I'm going to hand this back